Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am representing DG DEVCO here today, and the topic of our conference is Post-Cotonou negotiations. But I think before we talk about life after the Cotonou Agreement, I think it's a good idea to look at the original Cotonou Agreement, to look at what it was and who the main players were and what the aims were. So the Cotonou Agreement was a treaty signed between the European Union and the African, Caribbean, and Pacific group of states, also known more commonly as ACP countries. It was a treaty which was signed in June 2000 in the city of Cotonou. Cotonou is the largest city in Benin in Africa. And it was signed by 78 of the ACP countries. One country that didn't sign was Cuba. And it was signed between these ACP countries and the then 15 member states of the European Union. The agreement came into force in 2003 and then was revised on two occasions, in 2005 and in 2010. The treaty had a number of aims. There were 4 aims altogether. The first one was to reduce and eventually eradicate poverty. The second was to contribute towards sustainable development. The third was to integrate ACP countries into the world economy. And the fourth one was to fight against impunity and to promote criminal justice through the International Criminal Court. The Cotonou Agreement replaced another agreement, which was the Lomé Convention, which was signed back in 1975. And there were a number of differences between these two agreements, and I'll come to that in a moment. But the major difference between the Cotonou Agreement and the Lomé Convention was that the Cotonou Agreement involved a lot more players, a lot more stakeholders. So the Cotonou Agreement was signed for a period of 20 years. So it was signed back in 2000, so it's now coming to the end. And we'll look at the future post-Cotonou in a moment. But it was based on 4 main principles. The first principle was that all the partners were equal. So it wasn't the European Union talking down to poorer states, to African, Caribbean, and Pacific states. It gave these states a degree of ownership over the strategy. So they were allowed to determine how they developed their own economy and their own society. The second main focus was about participation. So obviously the central government of these countries were involved, but it was also opened up to other stakeholders like civil society, the private sector, and local governments. The third principle was about dialogue and mutual obligation. So the Cotonou Agreement wasn't just a pot of money that would be distributed to different countries. Countries had to sign up to certain obligations, and these obligations were monitored, and there was dialogue and evaluation along the way. The fourth principle was of differentiation and regionalization. So that means that the agreement was adapted to the regional and national situation of different countries. And there was, for example, there were different conditions for less developed countries or vulnerable countries like island states or landlocked countries. There was also a particularly strong political focus on issues such as peace and security, the arms trade, and migration. And good governance was also a very important part of the Cotonou Agreement to cut down on corruption and bribery, and also to just encourage good leadership in developing countries. There was another significant difference from the Lomé Convention, and that was to do with trade. So according to the Lomé Convention, there was non-reciprocal trade agreements which were signed. So that means that European Union countries had to open up their markets to ACP countries, but that didn't work in the other direction. It was just European Union countries opening up their markets, and ACP countries didn't have to open up their markets to the European Union. But that was then changed. There were a number of economic partnership agreements which were signed, and both the EU and ACP countries had to open up their markets and provide duty-free access to their markets. And of course, there were some exceptions to this rule for less developed countries and more vulnerable countries. So the Cotonou Agreement is coming to the end of its period, its 20-year period, and we're now looking at the post-Cotonou period and what the next step will be. And of course, the same process will be carried out and the agreement will follow similar lines. But we're 20 years on and our priorities have changed. And in the post-Cotonou Agreement, there needs to be a greater focus on gender, climate change, new technology, and achieving the SDGs. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Speaking on mute, as usual.
I think you're still
That was
recording,
a
are you?
quick speech. Oh, I'm recording. Oops.